My name is Alyssa Parker. I'm 31 years old, and the first time I laughed after my mother told me she had sold my inherited house, it wasn't because anything was funny. It was because my brain refused to accept what my ears had just heard. I was standing in the copy room of a small archival restoration studio in Savannah, Georgia, holding a pair of white cotton gloves in one hand and my phone in the other, when my mother said, as calmly as if she were discussing the weather, "The house has been sold. Your brother needed the money more than you needed an old building." For 3 seconds, I couldn't speak. That house was not just old. It was the house my grandmother left to me in her estate plan. It was the only place in my family where I had ever felt chosen. It was where she taught me how to press flowers between book pages, how to read old letters without tearing the paper, and how to understand that some things are valuable because love made them irreplaceable. Then my mother added the line that changed everything. "The money will go toward paying off your brother's vacation debt. He's been under stress." I laughed once and said, "So funny." She thought I was giving up. She thought I was still the quiet daughter who fixed everyone's mess, swallowed every insult, and protected the family name even when they used mine as a doormat. But what she didn't know was that my grandmother had left behind more than a house. She had left instructions. She had left proof. And before the sun went down, my lawyer would call me with one sentence that made my brother's entire face go white. "Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel." The first thing I did was not scream. I wanted to. I wanted to drop the phone, drive straight across town, and demand how a mother could sell the last gift a dead woman had left her granddaughter. But my work had taught me patience. When you restore documents from the 1800s, you learn that panic destroys evidence. So I placed the gloves on the table, closed the file box in front of me, and asked my mother one question. "Who signed the sale papers?" There was a pause. Not a long pause, but long enough. Then she said, "Don't start acting like a lawyer, Alyssa. Everything was handled." That was when I knew she had done something wrong. People who act within the law usually explain. People who don't tell you to calm down. I asked again, "Who signed?" She sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "I did. I had authority. Your grandmother trusted me to handle family matters." I looked through the glass wall of the restoration room at the rows of old county records stacked on my desk. My grandmother had trusted many people in her life, but blind trust had never been her weakness. She was careful. She labeled everything. She kept receipts from grocery stores, handwritten notes from church committees, warranty cards from appliances that had been thrown out 20 years earlier. There was no way she would leave the most important property in her life vulnerable to a casual family decision. "You had temporary access to maintain the property," I said slowly. "You did not own it." My mother's voice sharpened. "I am your mother. I don't need permission to make decisions that affect this family." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. In her mind, family meant everyone except me. When I asked how much the house sold for, she gave me a number so low I nearly laughed again. It was less than half of what similar historic homes on that street were worth. Then she added, "The buyer agreed to close quickly. We needed the funds before Brandon's travel payments went delinquent." That was the first time she said my brother's name. Brandon Parker, 28 years old, professional victim, part-time entrepreneur, full-time emergency. He had recently booked some luxury recovery retreat in Cabo with 3 friends after his online sneaker resale business collapsed. My mother called it emotional healing. I called it another bill, with my name quietly expected to appear beside it. "You sold my grandmother's house for Brandon's vacation debt?" I asked. She corrected me immediately. "Our family house." "No," I said. "My inherited house." Her laugh was small and cold. "You always were dramatic. You don't even live there." That was true. I didn't live there full time because I had been saving money to restore it properly. The roof needed repairs, the front porch had to be reinforced, and the city had historic preservation rules for every exterior change. I had spent 2 years collecting quotes, scanning old photographs, and planning to turn the downstairs into a small community archive in my grandmother's name. My mother knew that. Brandon knew that. They both knew it because they had mocked me for it at Thanksgiving. "A museum for dead paper," Brandon had called it, while eating the pie I brought. Very Alyssa. My mother told me to stop making everything about myself. But now they had made my grandmother's house about Brandon's beach cocktails. I hung up without saying goodbye. Then I drove to my parents' house. Not fast, not recklessly. I drove exactly at the speed limit because by then something cold and clear had settled in me. Rage is loud at first, but real resolve is quiet. When I pulled into their driveway, Brandon's black SUV was parked crooked across the walkway, a new luggage set visible through the back window. Inside, my mother was standing at the kitchen island with a folder open in front of her. Brandon sat on a bar stool wearing sunglasses indoors, scrolling through his phone like he was waiting for applause. My father, Richard Parker, was in the living room pretending to watch TV, which was what he always did when my mother did something cruel. He called it staying out of drama. I called it cowardice with a remote control. "There she is," Brandon said without looking up. "The historical house police?" My mother slid the folder toward me. "I printed copies so you can stop panicking." On top was a purchase agreement. Beneath it was a seller affidavit. Beneath that was a document that made the room tilt for half a second, a power of attorney form with my grandmother's name on it. The date was after my grandmother died. I stared at it, then looked at my mother. "This is impossible." She blinked once. It was in her files. Grandma was dead on this date. Brandon finally looked up. His smirk faltered, but only for a moment. Maybe it was prepared earlier and signed later. Who cares? The buyer accepted it. I said, "A dead woman cannot sign a document." My mother snatched the top page back as if paper could protect her. "Don't accuse us of things you don't understand." I pointed at the signature line. "I restore handwriting for a living. I compare ink, pressure, slant, spacing, and aging patterns every day. This is not her signature." My mother's face changed. Not enough for most people to notice, but I noticed. Her mouth tightened. Brandon stopped swinging his foot. For the first time since I walked in, he looked less entertained. "You think you're so special because you work with old junk?" he snapped. "But Mom handled it. You didn't even visit the house last month." "Because I was paying for the roof inspection," I said. "Because I was preserving it, not liquidating it." My mother slapped her palm on the counter. "Enough. Your brother needed help. You are stable. You have a career. You have savings. Brandon has been struggling." Brandon booked a luxury vacation he couldn't afford. He needed something to look forward to. I stared at her, truly stared, and understood that this was not a misunderstanding. This was a family system. I was the resource. Brandon was the reason. My father muted the television but still did not turn around. My mother pushed the folder toward me again. "The sale is done. Let it go, and I'll make sure you get a small portion later." Brandon laughed. "Maybe enough for a plaque. In memory of Alyssa's feelings." That was the moment I stopped feeling like their daughter and started feeling like the only adult in a room full of thieves. I picked up my phone and photographed every page before my mother could react. She lunged for the folder, but I had already stepped back. "Delete those," she said. "No. Alyssa, I am warning you." "Good," I said. Warnings sound better in court. Brandon stood up. "You wouldn't sue your own family." I looked at him, at his sunglasses, at the luggage in his car, at the false confidence of a man who had never faced consequences because my parents always found someone else to pay them. "You sold the wrong house," I said. Then I walked out while my mother shouted my name behind me. At the door, I heard Brandon say, not quietly enough, "She'll calm down. She always does." I paused with my hand on the knob, smiled without turning around, and said, "Not this time." I did not go home first. I drove to the house. The real house. The one with the pale blue shutters my grandmother insisted were not blue, sweetheart, but haint blue, because some traditions are older than we are. It sat on a quiet street shaded by live oaks, with Spanish moss hanging like gray lace from the branches. I had promised myself I would not describe it like a victim describes a lost thing, because it was not lost yet. Not if I could help it. Still, when I stepped onto the porch, my knees almost gave out. A small red notice had been taped to the front window. Property under contract. Access by appointment only. Under contract. As if love could be reduced to 2 words and a strip of tape. I removed the notice carefully and folded it into my bag. Evidence. The lock still accepted my key, which meant either the buyer had not taken possession yet, or the sale had been rushed so carelessly that no one had completed the transfer properly. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and lemon oil. My grandmother's cane still leaned beside the hallway bench. Her recipe cards were still in the kitchen drawer, bundled with a rubber band. A framed photograph of us sat on the mantel. Me, at 6 years old, missing one front tooth. Sitting on her lap while she held a book of poems. I touched the frame once, then pulled my hand back before nostalgia could weaken me. That was when my phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. It was a photo of a beach resort confirmation. Under it, he wrote, "Thanks for the upgrade, sis." I stared at the message until the words blurred. Then another text came from my mother. "Do not embarrass this family. We will discuss a fair arrangement after closing." I took screenshots of both. Then I called the only person I trusted enough to hear me sound broken without treating me like I was weak. Natalie Brooks answered on the second ring. "Tell me you're calling because you finally found that antique map you've been obsessing over." I said, "My mother sold Grandma's house." There was a silence on her end, then the scrape of a chair. "Where are you?" "At the house." "Stay there, I'm coming." Natalie was not the kind of friend who asked 12 questions before showing up. She had been my roommate in college, my emergency contact after I stopped listing my mother, and the person who once drove 6 hours to sit with me in a hospital waiting room when my grandmother had surgery. 20 minutes later, she walked through the front door carrying coffee, a legal pad, and the expression of a woman prepared for war. "Start from the beginning," she said. So I did. I told her about the phone call, the vacation debt, the fake power of attorney, the purchase agreement, Brandon's text, my father's silence, and my mother's confidence that I would fold. Natalie did not interrupt once. When I finished, she opened the legal pad and said, "First, your family is insane. Second, this is fraud adjacent at minimum. Third, I know someone." I looked at her. "A lawyer?" She nodded. "Daniel Mercer. He handled a property dispute for my aunt when her stepson tried to sell land using an outdated authorization. He is expensive, blunt, and extremely unpleasant to people who lie." "That sounds perfect." "It gets better," she said. "He used to work on trust litigation before moving into real estate law. If your grandmother used a trust, he'll know where to look." I remembered something then, not clearly at first, but like a light coming on in a basement. A year before she died, my grandmother had taken me to lunch and slid a sealed envelope across the table. "For when they start acting like grief is a business opportunity," she had said. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. She was old, tired and increasingly disappointed in the way my mother treated me. The envelope was still in the house somewhere. I had never opened it because, after the funeral, everything happened too fast. Hospice bills, memorial planning, probate notices, my mother insisting she would help manage things, Brandon asking whether the house had cash value. I ran upstairs to the small sewing room where my grandmother kept her private papers. Natalie followed. We searched through drawers, hat boxes, and labeled folders until I found a cream-colored envelope taped beneath the bottom of an old writing desk drawer. My name was on it in my grandmother's handwriting, not shaky, not uncertain. Strong, slanted, unmistakably hers. I opened it with my hands trembling. Inside was a letter, a copy of a trust certificate, a business card for an estate attorney, and one sentence underlined twice in blue ink. If anyone tries to pressure you, sell without your consent, or use family guilt to take this house, call Mr. Mercer immediately. I looked at Natalie. She looked at me. Mercer? I whispered. She took the business card from my hand. Daniel Mercer, attorney at law. The same lawyer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then my phone rang. Unknown number? I answered because my body seemed to know before my mind did. A man's voice said, Ms. Parker, this is Daniel Mercer. I received an automated notice from the county records office regarding an attempted transfer of the Whitaker property. Your grandmother paid my firm years ago to monitor filings connected to that address. I gripped the edge of the desk. My mother sold it. His voice went colder. No, Ms. Parker. She attempted to sell it. There is a difference. I closed my eyes. Downstairs, the old house settled around me with a soft wooden creak, almost like it had been holding its breath, and finally exhaled. What do I do? I asked. Daniel Mercer said, You do not speak to your mother again without me. You do not delete a single message. You do not sign anything. And you tell your brother that if he spends $1 connected to this transaction, he may be creating evidence against himself. He already sent me a resort confirmation. There was a pause. Then he said the sentence that made me stand up straighter. Good. Screenshot it twice. Daniel Mercer's office was not the kind of place that tried to impress you with glass walls and scented candles. It was above an old bank building downtown, with heavy wooden doors, brass lamps, and shelves stacked with property law books that looked as if they had survived 3 wars and several family betrayals. Natalie came with me, not because I needed her to speak for me, but because I needed one person in the room who knew the difference between my silence and surrender. Daniel was in his late 50s, tall, silver-haired, and calm in a way that made other people nervous. He did not offer dramatic sympathy. He did not say, I'm so sorry this happened. He pointed to a chair and said, Show me everything. I liked him immediately. I laid out the photographs of the documents, the texts from Brandon, the message from my mother, the window notice, the trust certificate, and my grandmother's letter. He examined each item with the precision of a surgeon. When he reached the fake power of attorney, he looked up. Your grandmother died March 17th. Yes. This document is dated April 2nd. Yes. Then it is legally worthless if presented as her authorization. If someone knowingly used it to support a sale, that is not a misunderstanding. Natalie leaned forward. What is it? Daniel removed his glasses. Potential fraud, potential forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on the funds movement, possibly financial exploitation of an estate asset. The words were heavy, but instead of frightening me, they gave shape to the thing I had been feeling. My mother had not simply hurt my feelings. She had crossed legal lines. Daniel then explained what my grandmother had done. Years before her death, she placed the Savannah house into a revocable living trust. Upon her death, the house was to pass to me, specifically and exclusively. My mother had been listed only as a temporary property manager for maintenance during the transition period, not as owner, trustee with sale authority, or beneficiary. Your grandmother anticipated conflict, Daniel said. That is why she created a recording alert and gave my firm instructions. She wanted the house protected. My throat tightened. She knew they would try something? She knew enough to prepare. He tapped the letter. People often call that paranoia until the paperwork proves it was wisdom. I looked down at my grandmother's handwriting and felt something inside me break open, not from pain, but from recognition. She had seen me. Even when I thought I was alone in that family, she had seen exactly what was happening. Daniel continued. The attempted sale appears to involve 3 problems. 1. Your mother lacked authority to sell. 2. The buyer may have relied on a defective document. 3. Your brother's messages suggest the proceeds were intended for personal use unrelated to the property or estate. We move quickly. Can we stop the closing? I asked. We can file an emergency petition for injunctive relief, record a notice of dispute, contact the closing attorney, notify the title company, and demand the escrowed funds be frozen. He said it like he was reading a grocery list. If funds have already moved, we trace them. Natalie smiled faintly. I told you he was unpleasant to people who lie. Daniel ignored that, but one corner of his mouth moved. Ms. Parker, I need you to understand something. Families like yours often rely on emotional exhaustion. They push, insult, guilt, confuse, and rush you until you accept a bad outcome just to make the noise stop. The legal system is slower than a family ambush, but it has one advantage. What? Paper does not care who cries louder. That sentence stayed with me. By the time I left his office, Daniel had already assigned his paralegal to pull county records. He had contacted the title company. He had drafted a preservation letter warning my mother, Brandon, the buyer, and the closing attorney not to destroy or alter documents. My phone started vibrating before I reached the parking lot. First my mother, then Brandon, then my father, then my mother again. I let every call go unanswered. A minute later, Brandon texted, "What did you do?" I showed Natalie. She raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Another message came through from my mother. "Call me immediately. You are making this worse." Then one from my father. "Your mother is crying. Please fix this." I laughed once. The same humorless laugh from the beginning. But this time it did not sound shocked. It sounded awake. I typed one response in a group chat with all 3 of them. All communication goes through my attorney now. Brandon replied with a string of curse words. My mother wrote, "You ungrateful little girl." My father wrote nothing. Then Daniel called. "They contacted you?" "Yes." "Good. Do not respond further. Also, the title company has frozen the file. Closing is suspended." I stopped walking. "Already?" "Already." "What about the money?" "Some earnest funds are in escrow. Larger disbursement has not cleared. Your brother's vacation company, however, received a deposit from an account linked to your mother." "Can we prove it came from the sale?" "Not yet. But your brother just helped us by sending a resort confirmation to the rightful beneficiary of the property he expected to benefit from." I looked across the street at the courthouse, its white columns bright in the afternoon sun. For the first time since my mother's call, the fear loosened its grip around my chest. "What happens next?" I asked. Daniel's answer was simple. Now they learned the difference between family pressure and a court order. The emergency hearing was scheduled 3 days later. 3 days was not much time to prepare for a legal fight over my dead grandmother's house, but it was enough time for guilt to start making noise. My mother left 11 voicemails. At first, she was furious. Then she became wounded. By the 7th message, she said my grandmother would be ashamed of me. That almost made me call back. until I looked again at the sentence my grandmother had underlined in her letter. If anyone tries to pressure you, sell without your consent, or use family guilt to take this house, call Mr. Mercer immediately. She had predicted even the guilt. Brandon's panic looked different. He posted a photo from an airport lounge with the caption, "Much needed reset. No negativity allowed." Natalie screenshotted it and sent it to Daniel before I even saw it. 20 minutes later, the post disappeared. "He's deleting evidence," I said. Daniel replied, "Screenshots exist for a reason." The morning of the hearing, I wore a navy dress my grandmother once said made me look like a woman who reads the fine print. I brought her letter in a protective sleeve, not because Daniel needed it, but because I did. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, which made everything feel more personal. My mother sat at the opposite table with Brandon and a lawyer who looked like he had learned the facts of the case in the hallway. My father sat behind them, staring at the floor. Brandon had shaved and dressed neatly, but the pale tan line from his resort bracelet was still visible on his wrist. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Daniel remained calm, almost unnervingly calm. The judge stated the matter: an emergency petition to stop the transfer of the Whitaker property and determine whether the attempted sale had been authorized. My mother's lawyer stood first and called it a family misunderstanding. He said my mother believed she had authority, that the house was a financial burden, and that I was emotionally attached to a practical decision. He used the phrase practical decision 3 times. Then Daniel stood. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked the judge through the trust certificate, naming me as beneficiary, the limited maintenance authority given to my mother, the purchase agreement, the power of attorney dated after my grandmother's death, the texts about Brandon's vacation debt, the resort confirmation, and the county alert triggered by the transfer attempt. The courtroom grew quieter with every document. Then Daniel said, "Your Honor, this is not about whether Ms. Parker loved a house too much. This is about whether a non-owner can use a dead woman's name to turn trust property into vacation money for her adult son." The judge looked at my mother. "Mrs. Parker, did you submit the April 2nd power of attorney?" Her lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge raised one hand. "I asked a simple question." My mother swallowed. "Yes." "Knowing your mother was deceased on April 2nd? She froze. Brandon leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't say anything." Everyone heard him. The air changed. In that moment, my mother stopped looking like a confused parent and started looking like someone caught. The judge asked whether any proceeds had been dispersed. The closing attorney appeared by video and confirmed the title company had frozen the transaction after Daniel's notice. A buyer representative admitted they had relied on documents provided by my mother because the sale had been presented as urgent. Daniel looked toward Brandon. "Urgent because of a vacation balance?" Then he presented Brandon's text. "Thanks for the upgrade, sis." The judge read it twice. "Mr. Parker, what upgrade were you referring to?" Brandon shifted. "It was a joke." "A joke about funds from property your sister claimed as inherited?" "I didn't know the legal details," he muttered. Daniel said, "But you knew enough to thank her." Brandon's face turned red. Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Parker, do you wish to speak?" Daniel had told me I did not have to, but my grandmother's letter was in my lap, and there was one thing the documents could not say for me. I stood. "Your Honor, I am not here because I wanted to punish my family. I am here because my grandmother made a choice, and after she died, the people who should have honored her tried to erase it. That house was not abandoned. I was restoring it. My mother knew that. My brother knew that. They did not ask me because they knew the answer would be no." I looked at my mother. They were counting on me being too loyal to defend myself. The courtroom stayed silent. The judge nodded once. "You may sit." Then he called for a short recess, As he left the bench, Brandon finally looked at me. The smirk was gone. What remained was a grown man realizing his sister had stopped being the family safety net right when he had jumped. During the recess, my mother tried to approach me in the hallway. Daniel stepped between us before she got within 5 feet. "Mrs. Parker, you are represented by counsel. Do not speak to my client." She looked past him at me. "Alyssa, please. This has gone too far." It was amazing how quickly consequences became too far when they reached her. "We can settle this privately," she said. "This is family." Daniel answered before I could. "Then your family should have avoided forged documents." Her face hardened. "I did not forge anything." "Then the handwriting analysis will be interesting." That silenced her. Brandon stood behind her, typing furiously. Natalie glanced at his screen as she passed, and later whispered, "He's trying to cancel something. Looks like the vacation." I should not have enjoyed that as much as I did, but a small part of me pictured his luxury resort collapsing under the weight of his own stupidity, and that part of me applauded. When court resumed, Daniel introduced a preliminary handwriting comparison from an independent document examiner. It identified major inconsistencies between my grandmother's known signature and the signature on the April 2nd power of attorney. The angle was wrong, the pressure was wrong, the capital letters were formed differently. There were also signs of unnatural hesitation. My mother understood enough. The judge asked whether her lawyer still wished to maintain that the document had been validly executed. Her lawyer requested 5 minutes. They whispered. Brandon whispered. My father stared at the floor. My mother's eyes filled with trapped tears, the kind that had no strategic place to go. When her lawyer stood again, his voice was weaker. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges there may have been confusion regarding the scope of her authority." Daniel stood immediately. "We object to the word confusion." The judge said, "Noted." Then came the ruling. The judge found that I had shown a strong likelihood of success, that the trust document supported my claim as rightful beneficiary, and that the attempted sale created risk of irreparable harm. He issued an injunction blocking the sale, ordered the notice of dispute to remain on the property records, froze any funds connected to the transaction, and prohibited my mother, Brandon, or anyone acting on their behalf from entering, marketing, transferring, or borrowing against the house. He also ordered my mother to provide a full accounting within 10 business days of any money received, promised, transferred, deposited, or spent in connection with the attempted sale. Brandon shifted in his seat. The judge noticed. "Mr. Parker, preserve all communications, receipts, travel bookings, bank records, and electronic messages relating to funds expected from this property transaction." Brandon nodded too quickly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Deleting records after this order," the judge added, "would be a very poor decision." But the judge was not finished. He referred the questionable power of attorney for further review and warned that legal fees and damages could be assessed after the accounting. My mother gasped softly. Brandon whispered, "Mom." She did not look at him. That was new. My entire life, she had turned toward Brandon first. If he failed, she made excuses. If he wanted, she found a way. But in that courtroom, when the cost of rescuing him finally came due, she looked away. The judge ended with a sentence I will never forget. "A family relationship does not create ownership rights in another person's inheritance." The gavel came down. Outside the courtroom, Brandon stormed toward me. "My trip is ruined," Natalie said, "Wow," out loud. Daniel turned his head slowly. "Mr. Parker, I strongly advise you not to complain about a canceled vacation while standing beside evidence of a disputed property transfer." Brandon's mouth closed. Then my father approached me. For 1 second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he said, "Couldn't you have handled this without humiliating your mother?" I looked at him and felt the last thread between us loosen. She humiliated herself when she used Grandma's name after Grandma was dead. He flinched. Good. Some truth should land hard. Daniel walked me outside and handed me a copy of the order. "This is not the final lawsuit," he said, "but the house is protected." "What happens to them?" I asked. "Your mother will have to account for everything. If funds were misused, we pursue recovery. If documents were forged, that becomes a separate matter. Your brother may be pulled further in depending on what records show." Across the steps, my mother and Brandon were arguing beside the courthouse. He was waving his phone. She was shaking her head. My father stood between them, useless as ever. For the first time, I did not feel the urge to manage them. Their chaos was no longer my assignment. Then Brandon texted the family group chat. "Hope you're happy." I typed nothing. I simply took a screenshot and forwarded it to Daniel. He replied with 3 words. "He never learns." The first night I slept in my grandmother's house after the hearing, I barely slept at all. Not because I was afraid, but because peace felt unfamiliar. In my family, quiet had always been the short pause before Brandon's next crisis or my mother's next demand. But that night, the house was still. The hallway clock ticked. The wind moved gently against the shutters. I lay under a quilt my grandmother had sewn from fabric scraps and realized that, for once, nobody needed me to apologize for protecting myself. The next morning, I made coffee in her kitchen and opened the back door to let in the cool air. There was work everywhere. The porch needed repairs. The garden had gone wild. Dust covered the shelves. A loose floorboard near the stairs still lifted at one corner, exactly where it had when I was a child. But none of it looked like a burden anymore. It looked like a promise waiting for me to keep it. Over the next few weeks, I changed the locks under Daniel's supervision, installed cameras, met with a historic preservation contractor, and opened a separate account for restoration expenses. I gave Daniel every voicemail, text, screenshot, and document connected to the attempted sale. My mother submitted her accounting late and incomplete. Daniel was not amused. Brandon lost the vacation deposit, the upgrade fee, and several friendships after telling people his crazy sister froze family money. Unfortunately for him, one of those friends had a cousin in real estate law who publicly explained that frozen family money often meant disputed funds tied to possible fraud. The story spread faster than I expected. Not because I posted it, I didn't have to. My mother had built her reputation as the devoted daughter and generous mother, the woman who held the family together. When people learned she had tried to sell her own mother's trust property to fund Brandon's vacation debt, that image cracked. Church friends stopped commenting hearts on her posts. A cousin called and said, "I always wondered why your grandmother was so specific about that house." A neighbor brought over a casserole and said, "Your grandma knew exactly what she was doing, honey." That comforted me more than any apology from my family could have. My mother eventually sent a long email. She never said, "I'm sorry I tried to sell your house." She said she was sorry I felt betrayed. Sorry things became legal. Sorry outsiders were judging us. Sorry Brandon had been in a dark place. Then she wrote, "You have always been stronger, and stronger people have a responsibility to forgive." That sentence made me close my laptop and walk outside. Stronger people do not exist to absorb weaker people's selfishness. Responsible daughters do not owe silence to dishonest mothers, and forgiveness cannot be demanded like a payment plan. I sat on the porch steps and wrote my grandmother a letter. "Dear Grandma, they tried it. You knew they might. I wish you had been wrong. I wish Mom had chosen me once. I wish Brandon had looked at your house and seen history instead of money, but I found your letter. I called Daniel. I stood up. The house is still here. I am still here. And I finally understand what you meant when you said love is not proven by what we tolerate. It is proven by what we protect." I folded the letter and placed it in the same writing desk drawer where I had found hers. Then I began restoring the house one room at a time. In the front room, I cleaned my grandmother's books. In the kitchen, I framed one of her handwritten recipe cards. In the hallway, I hung the photograph of us when I was 6. In the downstairs room facing the street, I started building the community archive I had promised myself I would create. Not a museum for dead paper, as Brandon had mocked, but a place for memory to stay alive. Old letters, family photographs, church programs, maps. Things people almost threw away because they did not understand that ordinary lives become history when someone cares enough to preserve them. The legal case continued. Real justice is not as fast as a dramatic courtroom scene. There were filings, bank records, document requests, and uncomfortable questions my mother could no longer avoid. Eventually, the attempted sale was fully voided. The buyer withdrew and pursued their own remedies for being misled. My mother was ordered to cover part of my legal fees and restoration-related costs. Brandon was kept away from anything connected to the trust. His vacation never happened. His social media went quiet. My father sent holiday messages that sounded like they came from a man standing outside a locked room he helped build. I did not block them at first. I simply stopped answering. There is a difference. Blocking is sometimes necessary, but silence can also be a boundary. Mine said, I am no longer available for family emergencies created by greed. Months later, on my grandmother's birthday, I opened the archive room for the first time. Only a dozen people came, mostly neighbors and older women from her church, but it felt full. One woman brought letters her husband had sent from basic training. Another brought photographs of the street after a hurricane. A little girl asked why old paper needed gloves, and I showed her how oils from our hands can damage fragile surfaces. She listened carefully, then whispered, "So we protect it, because it can't protect itself." I smiled. Exactly. That evening, after everyone left, I stood alone in the front room. The house was not perfectly restored. The lawsuit had not magically healed my heart. My mother had not become the parent I deserved. Brandon had not become humble. My father had not found courage. But I had changed. I no longer measured love by how much pain I could survive quietly. I no longer believed being the stable one meant being the sacrificial one. My grandmother taught me that inheritance is not just property. It is responsibility. It is memory. It is the right to protect what was entrusted to you, even when the people trying to take it share your last name. So when people ask if I regret taking my mother and brother to court, I tell them the truth. I regret that they made it necessary, but I do not regret standing up. I do not regret calling Daniel. I do not regret letting the truth enter a courtroom where family guilt could not interrupt it. Because the day my lawyer stepped in was not the day I destroyed my family. It was the day I stopped letting my family destroy me. My grandmother's house still stands in Savannah with blue shutters, repaired steps, and a brass plaque by the door that reads, "The Evelyn Whitaker Community Archive, for the memories worth protecting." Every time I unlock that door, I remember my mother's words. The money will go to pay off your brother's vacation. She thought that sentence would end the discussion. Instead, it became the first line of the story where I finally chose myself. So tell me, if someone in your family tried to sell the last thing a person you loved left behind, would you stay quiet to keep the peace, or would you fight to protect it?
We put a lot of care into every script, hoping to bring you stories that are not only satisfying, but also meaningful and thought-provoking. This fictional story was created for entertainment and educational purposes, reminding us that revenge is not always about hurting others. Sometimes the best revenge is healing, growing, and living a better life.